Thank you for joining Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Helen Oakley. Helen, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting to have a discussion with you today.
Yeah, I've been following you on LinkedIn, like I said, for quite a while. Your content, some of your talks, and your discussions around different topics. But for folks that don't know you and haven't followed you in the past, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I work for SAP as Director of Software Supply Chain Security and Secure Development. So work on the implementation of different measures around supply chains, safeguarding CI/CD pipelines, but also implementation of software transparency that we know through the AIBOM Software Bill of Material. I'm also responsible for AI software supply chain at SAP and implementing those measures as well. On top of that, I'm also co-leading AIBOM Tiger Team under CISA initiative that we have launched earlier this year to identify how we're going to implement AI bomb. And I think today we'll talk a lot about that. On top of that, I'm founding partner for AI Safety, AI Integrity and Safe Use Foundation, AISUF, and feel free to follow me and learn more about that.
Yeah, I'll definitely be sharing a link here for folks following along online for both you and the organization. Before we dive into the software supply chain piece, the AI bomb, and all that exciting stuff, obviously people are, you're very focused on AI and AI security right now, and a lot of folks are, just kind of getting started and trying to understand, what is this AI thing, Gen AI, LLMs, where do I get started, models, model security, on and on. When you talk to people, where do you recommend they start, to try to even get a handle on the concept of AI, AI governance, AI security, transparency, and so on?
So AI transparency, quite advanced topic I find these days. So first of all, we need to understand what kind of models we even adopt, right? And what kind of risks with them. And simple reviews of the ethics of the model, the impact of the model is the starting points to identify how you are implementing and what are the risks from governance perspective by using this AI and what kind of risks it brings into the company. And then, of course, we would drill down into more details of transparency and supply chain of AI, which is very complex and novel topic these days.
Yeah, I was joking with you off air a little bit. There's some very interesting, like obviously I've written a book on software supply chain security, but there's some very, there's a lot of parallels when it comes to software supply chain and the broader context traditionally when it comes to AI, but there's also some nuances and novel aspects of AI that make it a little bit different. What do you find some of the biggest differences are between traditional kind of software supply chain security and then AI that makes it a little bit unique?
Comparing to software supply chain in traditional software, we have very specific snapshots, and when we're creating snapshots about the software in SBOMs, and it doesn't change until the next build, yeah, typically. But with AI, it's different. We need to collect more than that. Yes, we need to collect traditional software details about the supply chain and dependencies, but also information about AI. So the technology, the difference is that now we have the training and the changing of AI in a runtime. That's the real challenge, understanding how it changes, what's impacting that change, and how do we identify the risks in that. So on top of all the traditional supply chain risks, we also have those kind of risks, that dynamic change of AI.
Yeah, so digging a little deeper on that, there's some parallels in software supply chain when we think about commercial proprietary software versus, say, open source software, and we see some of that playing out right now with kind of an open source approach to AI and models and things like that, and platforms like Hugging Face and so on. And then there's obviously major AI platform providers like OpenAI and others who are not fully transparent and open source, for example. What are some unique considerations in each of those approaches as organizations adopt one or the other or both that they might want to keep in mind when it comes to software supply chain and transparency?
Yeah, so right now there are a lot of unknowns. Yeah, so when we talk about bigger vendors such as OpenAI, who providing already established, and they do have a lot of practices that incorporate the security and supply chain into their practices as well. But still, we have a lot of unknowns, such as we don't exactly understand what is changing, how the decision is being made exactly, yeah, and maybe not to the extent we would like to understand what kind of data has been used to train these kind of models, right? So, for example, an interesting question would be, can I generate my code with AI? Would that implicate my IP protection in the future? Because what if that suggestion of AI was done based on some existing patents, right? Then you have this copyright infringement risk. So things like that we need to consider. And this is why it's very important to review closely when we are adopting AI for a usage, but also for extension internally. Comparing to open source or third party outside of large vendors, and I would say maybe we don't really have true open source like the open source software, yeah, because it still takes an organization to train the model. It's not going to be a community who trains the model, really. So there is kind of a different paradigm of third-party open source models. For that, we need to understand what are the risks associated. There are a lot of vulnerable models today and Hugging Face, and they're vulnerable by design. Yeah, so with certain capabilities, they can introduce actually remote code execution, as well as data sets. Not only the poison data sets, potential risk, but also sometimes there could be vulnerabilities like executable pieces of code within the data sets. So we need to have a very detailed review of the third-party models that we are consuming, understanding how it would impact organization and subsequent implementation of those models.
So out of curiosity, like, these are obviously some pretty nuanced skill sets and expertise of knowing what to look for or how to look for things within the models and the platforms that you're using. How do you see organizations starting to approach this, given that most organizations may not have people who have expertise in model integrity and security and supply chain considerations? And like, as you interface with the community, how do they start to tackle this, or how are they thinking about tackling this, given that many organizations just don't have the expertise quite yet in this domain?
I do see a lot of organizations still struggle with that. And um, generally, for the smaller companies, perhaps they just try and experiment without in-depth understanding. And we're talking about data scientists, not security people who start that experimentation, right? So there isn't really a security um, uh, kind of front thinking of adopting the AI when they experiment. And even during experimentation, you can already bring risks into your organization. On other side, organizations that are more mature, I see different processes implemented, like reviews for licensing, reviews for ethics, for restricted use, for example, right, based on certain regulations. Some security scans, right? There's also available tools for that. But we are still not there to streamline that. And if we introduce a lot of manual inputs, manual steps to review and identify risks in AI that we're consuming, it will be slowing down our innovation. So we see how everything is rapidly evolving right now. And the last thing we want to be is creating blocks, right? So we need to think also, how do we balance this, and how do we help innovation to like development teams to streamline their activities while introducing the security aspect of this. And this is where we're going into automation of software transparency, right, in AI, to kind of flash out these risks and make sure that we understand the risk and we can um, mitigate that accordingly.
Yeah, I love the balance, the emphasis you put on balance, because I've been writing and speaking a lot about this topic. Is we saw it with cloud and SaaS, and now AI and other trends before it. Is like, if we inject too much rigor, governance, friction, the business is going to go about doing what it does. Either we're going to slow it down and they're going to resent us, and it's going to damage or relationships we may have, right, with our engineering development teams, or they're likely going to work around us, and then we're not maybe involved in the process, and that can lead to risks as well. So on the transparency front, you've been doing a lot of work around what you call AIBOM, or AI bill of materials. For folks not familiar with what a bomb is, first, like, can you explain that? And then, what exactly is an AI bomb, and how is that different than, say, an S bomb, for example?
Yeah, so bill of material, I think historically we had bill of material for a long time. But with software bill of material and with the, in the past few years, innovations that we have around that area, it's the really machine readable format that we have in CycloneDX or SPDX, the main formats, that we can implement, automate, and personalize in our organization to identify timely the impact across all components, if like log4j, for example, happens, or so that we can identify the usage, we can identify vulnerabilities and react and patch fast. Now, what is AIBOM in this? So actually, AIBOM is a subset of AI relevant fields that are included in an SBOM. So it's same format, CycloneDX or SPDX, with the AI relevant field. So we still have the information about the software as part of the traditional SBOM, perhaps some dependencies in embedded components, but also we have additional fields like information about model, about data sets, how it's been trained, and even up to things like energy consumption.
Yeah, energy consumption is an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that. First off, it's good that you guys, you're rallying around existing SBOM formats, like you talked about with Cyclone DX and SPDX. So not a new format for people to have to deal with or tools to have to deal with, and so on. And then the energy consumption piece is very interesting because it's something that many folks might not initially consider or think about when they talk about consuming AI and using AI in different models. I also know you've been involved in, as you talked about, the AI Integrity and Safe Use Foundation. Can you tell us a bit about the organization, what you all do or plan to do, and how people maybe can learn more?
Yes, the idea of this organization is that development of a framework that will help different organizations to identify risks. Yeah, and this framework provides a breakdown of grades and standards within each grade to help the organizations to go through the standards and identify what is the minimum they should implement with AI, and then how do they mature, around AI. For example, security framework for general purpose AI has three grades. Basic grade for security standards, when you have to just your hygiene, your encryption, your authorization and authentication. Then it goes into more enhanced standards, and then the advanced is about the whole transparency and security, where we have generated and automated AI bomb, and we have identified risks. So this is really the top level maturity. And another paradigm of this framework is actually critical infrastructure AI security. And these grades are focusing on the safety of AI and how, on top of the general use, what else we need to implement for critical infrastructure. For example, in order to be so-called compliant for safe use for critical infrastructure, you would need to implement at least second level grade for the general purpose use of AI. Yeah, because that outlines the fundamental of implementation. And then you would go into additional levels depending on where it's what kind of critical infrastructure it is. For example, if it's medical devices, right, or it's automated surgical robots that powered by AI. Now, this AI has to be very specifically trained to make sure that it has all the safety capabilities, right? And then you would need to have a higher grade of critical infrastructure, whether then maybe lower grade, maybe financial systems don't really impact safety of a human, but it's still critical infrastructure would need to be complied with perhaps a lower grade. So that's the idea of the framework, and it's still in the development right now. But at the end, it will support organizations for further implementation and maturity around AI.
Awesome. I know in security, we are big fans of our maturity models. It gives us a way to approach something without, trying to boil the ocean all at once. So you mentioned like safety there quite a bit. So it made me think of, the regulatory landscape and how that's evolving around AI. Obviously, we have in the United States, we have the AI executive order. In the EU, we have other things like the EU AI Act. I'm curious your perspective as someone who's focusing on this domain quite a bit. What do you think of the two approaches that are kind of evolving in the United States versus the EU, and where you think those will go and what impact they may have. For example, I saw someone share, I think in the EU, some of the features of, like, say, the latest Apple device, for example, may not include the AI feature because of some requirements around the EU AI Act and things like that. I'm just curious, like, your thoughts around, the regulatory landscape as it applies to AI.
Yes, and I see that there are a lot of strict rules that are being implemented across those regulatory requirements. So EU Act, but also SB 1047 in California, right? That is being rolled out as well. Both introduce all the aspects around basic security, but also in addition, you have accountability and you have safety and you have supply chain risks as well that you need to handle there. So it does really put a different perspective. So, and think about this rapid implementation of all the AI systems by many organizations. And I've seen this very funny image recently, like we're just gonna nail the bolts with the hammer of AI. Yeah, so whatever problem, relevant or not, AI will solve all our problems. Whether or not it will solve problems, we have AI in our organization. And now think about all these organizations now suddenly will have to comply with regulatory requirements that are being popping up. And the interpretation of these requirements can be also vary from organization to organization. While some may have a chatbot in a call center, for example, and it may not be so critical. But if you're working with the health data, you become suddenly way more critical, even if it's also like a chatbot, right? So then you have different perspective. And I think a lot of organizations will also realize, and they already becoming to realize, because with the work of AIBOM Forum, Tiger Team, we have more and more organizations joining that forum because they realize how important that automation of transparency is in order to be ready to comply with all the regulations and understand what risks we have.
Yeah, I love the intersection that you emphasized around transparency and the regulation side of things. Because if you don't really understand what you're using or what's involved, the supply chain aspect of it, and who's accessing it, all those kind of things that are involved in that broader discussion, it's going to be really hard to meet the emerging regulatory requirements without that kind of insight. So I wanted to ask, we've run the gamut of, kind of the organizations that you're involved with, from AI. SUF.org, definitely check that out. And then obviously the software supply chain piece, open source versus proprietary models and service providers. Where can folks learn more? Where can they follow along with what you're doing and stay up to date in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to share, I will put a link as well in the chat right now for you so you can share. AIBOM Tiger Team under CISA is working on this effort of implementing use cases for AIBOM. So, and I'm evangelizing that, but actually it's very, it's foundational for the transparency, to have this. I see AIBOM as not just enabler for security, right, by bringing transparency, but also enabler for the regulatory compliance, because it's a perfect mechanism that can collect the evidences for compliance. Yeah, and of course, streamlining the innovations. If you have this automated down the road, then imagine even for experimentation, you can just instantly identify if there are any risks for the model that you want to experiment with. Yeah, so I find that it's very important work that we're doing with this Tiger Team by defining these use cases and bridging the understanding between the technical standard of CycloneDX, SPDX, and the top-down level to have this use case. How do we operationalize AIBOM? So definitely follow this GitHub. We have different repos there. Tiger Team repo, where you can find all the links, the running drafts and the minutes. You can join our call. There are all information is there. Yeah, and if there's a special workshop coming up, like we had a couple of weeks ago with CISA, AIBOM, then we're also publishing those kind of workshop as part of the repository for AIBOM Squad.
That's amazing. Yeah, you heard it there, folks. This is a quickly moving space. You can get involved at github.com/AIBOM-squad. So definitely check that out. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. And Helen, thanks so much for joining us today and diving into all things AI and supply chain.
Thank you. It was perfect. It was interesting discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Take care.